Hey, welcome everybody. It's 2 o'clock. Thanks for being here. We're going to get started. My name is Amy Forbes, and I'm the training manager with the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or otherwise known as MHTTC. Welcome to today's webinar, Organizational Cultural Change, Facilitating the Development of Healthy Working Teams with Dr. Kira Mauseth. We're really excited to have her here today. Before we get started, I am going to go through a little bit about the MHTTC network. We are a nationwide network that is supported by SAMHSA. The MHTTC includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office out of Stanford University. And as you can see, the pink circle at the top is the Northwest MHTTC, and we cover HHS Region 10, which includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State. The goals of the Northwest MHTTC are to support the implementation of mental health-related evidence-based practices, heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the behavioral health workforce, foster alliances and address the diversity of training needs, and to share free publicly available training and technical assistance. Our area of focus supports evidence-based practices for psychosis, which includes CBTP and assertive community treatment, or ACT. But we also provide training on numerous other topics. Please do check out our website. On there, you can watch recorded webinars, register for any upcoming webinars or learning communities. You can take an online self-paced course through Healthy Knowledge, sign up for our weekly newsletter, review our resource library, and you can also listen to our podcast called Putting It Together. And before we get started, I'm going to share a little bit about today's event. We will be sending a link to the webinar recording, presentation slides, and your certificate of attendance within a couple weeks after this event. And in order to communicate during this event, please do use the chat box if you need assistance from our staff or you would just like to share respectful comments, greetings, and observations with everybody. We do ask that you use the Q&A box to type your specific questions to our presenter. You can do this at any point throughout the presentation, and we will be monitoring the Q&A box to facilitate answering as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Please know that your opinions are important to our work, and we would appreciate your response to a short survey after the event. Our team will share that link in the chat today, and you will receive an email reminder via Zoom tomorrow. We are required by SAMHSA to conduct this survey, yet they do not have an official position on our content. We'd also like to share some upcoming events with you. On June 17th, we're going to have the third event in our sexual health series on PrEP. And then on June 18th, we're very excited to welcome back Dr. Mauseth, who's going to co-present on culturally informed crisis support. And with that, I'd like to welcome and introduce you all to today's presenter, Dr. Kira Mauseth. She is a practicing clinical psychologist, a professor at Seattle University, and formerly served as co-lead on the behavioral health strike team for the Washington State Department of Health throughout the COVID response. She consults with and provides training to organizations, community groups, and professionals, both regionally and abroad, as a co-developer of the Health Support Team program. Dr. Mauseth has worked abroad extensively with disaster survivors and refugees in Haiti, Jordan, and Poland. And she has trained first responders and healthcare workers throughout the United States. She currently serves in the Adult Mental Health Clinical Seat on Washington State's Disaster Medical Advisory Committee, or DMAC. And Kira, we are very, very happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Alrighty. Thank you.
And hand it off to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you everybody for being here. I am happy to be back and chatting with you about these things. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going and jump right in. Let's see. Whoops. I'm skipping ahead. Okay, there we go. So as Amy mentioned, I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A throughout the talk. And if there are things that I can answer as I'm going, I'm going to try and do that just so that we get to everything. If there are a lot of questions, I really don't know what to expect. And then I'll save some time at the end as well for things that I don't have a chance to answer while I'm talking about this stuff. So yeah. Okay. Moving my screens around to just make sure I can see the Q&A and keep an eye on the chat and all the good things with all this Zoom stuff. All right. So we're going to talk about culture change and organizational development. This is something that I don't get to talk about very often. I really love it. I did my dissertation actually on job satisfaction from a organizational psychology kind of a perspective, looking at clinical issues and organizational stuff too. So I really love this stuff, and I'm hoping that there will be some takeaways for everybody, depending on what role you play, what type of organization you're part of, or what you represent. I'm hoping that there will be some leadership tidbits. I'm hoping that there will be some team member sort of group contribution tidbits, things that you can apply personally in the role that you have and also in the sector. So the way it's going to break down, I'm going to start with large scale things first and then sort of narrow it down. So we're going to talk about what are the required elements for culture change in general. So if you really want to get your organization or even your team, your working group or your team headed kind of in a different direction or sort of oriented around a different type of work culture, these are the things that need to be considered in order to do that. And then I'm going to talk about just some organizational psych concepts and some group dynamics theories and sort of strategies, concepts that really play a role in how work groups and teams function, things that get in our way of being healthy as well as productive. And sort of some of the things that each of us can do in terms of contributions, regardless of the role that we play. I'm going to talk a lot about workplace motivation, the things that really get us excited about participating in culture change, and then individual variables that also play a role, and then the desired outcomes that we're looking at from an organizational lens, a group lens, group working team lens, as well as an individual lens. So all three. That's the plan for today. All right, big picture here. Components and steps required for change. If you're looking at changing the culture of the place in which you work, and again, if you're a big fish in a small pond, or if you're a small fish in a very big pond, you still have a strong role to play in culture change. Because one of the interesting things about organizational culture in general is that it is made up of the components of all the individual people and experiences and life pictures that are part of it, right? So culture doesn't exist without the people that are contributing to it. So regardless of what role you play, there is a emphasis here on the power of, I guess I should say, empowerment and the degree of contribution that everyone can make. So in order to officially work on culture change, like again, from this org psych lens, you need 4 steps really. The first piece is to sort of assess what you're doing that already works. What are the needs in terms of what people are saying they would like to see changed, or what you are perceiving needs to be changed, as well as what are the resources available to make that work. So you're giving yourself sort of this grocery list landscape of what are the things we've got going, what are the things that we still need, where are the gaps, and you're kind of doing a little bit of an assessment rather than just diving in and saying, well, we need to do this and that. It's like, well, do you actually need that, or are you meeting those needs in certain areas and there are gaps in other places that you might not be aware of? So sort of some thinking and some thorough assessment. The way to do that really effectively is to be sure to have information from people across levels. So this is really not about just listening to one group of people and their perspective. It's about trying to understand the big picture from all of the different sectors within the organization. I was on a group meeting right before this webinar, and we were talking about how when we talk about behavioral health and all of the things that influence behavioral health, we're looking at an elephant, right? And we each have our own view. We have the ear, we have the foot, we have the tail. There's an old parable that goes with this. But when you only see your piece, you can't see the big picture. And so when we're talking about culture change on an organizational level, you have to be willing to ask questions of people and to get information from outside of just your perspective. ask everybody what they think about behavioral health, for example, to understand where the organizational dynamics need to shift on that topic. The second piece is to align your strategy with the resources and the structure that you're working in. So if you have one manager and 20 people reporting to that one manager, that gives you a specific leadership framework in which to work. If you have small teams where people are operating sort of as colleagues and equals in groups of 3 or 4, that's a totally different structure. So you're going to do different choices for implementation based on the structure that your organization is using to push information out, to try new things. No matter what kind of thing it is that's changing, think about how that happens in your organization. Is it top down? Is it bottom up? Is it inside out? Like, where is it coming from? How are the messages getting delivered? How is the reinforcement getting how is the practice being supported? And how is the reinforcement for change being encouraged, right? What are the practices in place already that get people to do new things, even, the positive things as well as the things that they don't really want to do. In my experience, working in a variety of different organizational sectors, I have found that software changes, like whether it's an accounting system or any kind of IT sort of storage stuff and communal databases that everybody uses, whenever those things change, there's a lot of difficulty shuffling around that. There's a lot of familiarity with old systems, and there's kind of some pushback around new things. Sometimes the new things are great. Sometimes the new things are not so great. And so you want to think about how does the message of change get sort of processed through the organization? What direction is that flow? Because you want to use what works and you want to not keep doing something if it doesn't work. The third and fourth steps are really about facilitating participation through that analysis and awareness of how we already do stuff, what works and what doesn't, and then really continuing to reinforce and communicate, demonstrate from a leadership perspective right on down, practicing the elements of change. I'm going to walk you through a very specific example of this in just a second, but I want you to be thinking about in your organization, especially for those of you who might be in leadership positions, like where are the gaps in this process? Maybe you have great assessment and you have a good strategy that works, but it's hard to facilitate participation because of fill in the blank, right? It could be a staffing shortage. It could be lots of turnover. So where might the challenge be when you're talking about effective culture change? It's different for every company, right? So the actual roadmap for how to change, like the components that are needed to get there, include training, include materials and processes, operational norms, discussion and consultation, and then evaluation and revision. Like those are the 5 steps that I would say are necessary to really reinforce and have successful culture change within a company or any whether it's nonprofit or not. I'm saying company or organization, but I really mean that interchangeably with any business that's run for or nonprofit. So here's your specific example of this big picture stuff. There are 5 different components, 5 different steps, and I know this slide has a lot of stuff on it, so I'm going to try and give you some examples along the way. So the first thing is training, and I'm using this behavioral health example. If you want your organization to promote behavioral health and wellness from within, this is actually a roadmap that is based on one that I designed when I was doing some consultation with an emergency response group. They're looking at increasing the behavioral health of their first responders. And so this was sort of a way that we talked about doing that. 5 different steps. So the first step is to orient leadership who hasn't already bought in on why this is so important. So there's training around reinforcing why you need to do something and how you think you might go about doing it. Maybe it would be focus groups and also collecting some information from people. Oh, I see there's a hand raised. I don't know if that's accidental or not. Oh, it went down. Okay. If you have a question, I do have the Q&A up. So if there's a content question, go ahead and add it in the Q&A and I'll get to it at the end. Thanks. Okay, so the first step here is training. It's about really making sure that everybody knows why we're doing this, and not just, oh, it's a random idea that somebody had. We need to do culture change. We need to improve behavioral health, but why, right? When it comes to behavioral health in general, what you want to be doing is decreasing burnout. You want to be increasing employee wellness, job satisfaction. The why is pretty clear in my mind for how important it is to promote behavioral health, but Not everybody's on the same page with that. So it starts with training. The second piece in the process is adopting and revising all of the materials that employees and team members have access to. So training guides, orientation manuals. It has to be programmatic. Like, where is behavioral health or any other culture change element? How do you build that in to the materials that people have access to, whether those are webinars, whether that's an actual employee handbook? Is it a little like addendum at the end, or is it woven throughout? Because when you're talking about culture, it is woven throughout something. And so if the topic again is behavioral health, it can't be just a little extra addendum at the end of the employee handbook. It needs to be consistently mentioned. There needs to be references to supporting behavioral health and how you do that and what the resources around that look like and what your avenues for support are, all the way through the employee handbook and the orientation materials. All the other sort of standard boilerplate workplace materials need to be evaluated to see if they're consistent with this culture change around behavioral health or if they're not, right? Again, just using behavioral health as an example here. The third one is where it gets a little tricky, because this is around how culture changes the norms of a company or an organization. This is around thinking about, and again, the specific example that I'm using here was for first responders. So this was about embedding processes into response work that support behavioral health. So if it's not first responders, if it's a different kind of organization, how do you embed processes that are helpful for people that support wellness in team meetings? How do you do that with one-on-ones? How do you do that with evaluations, with performance evaluations? Because it can be, absolutely. It's not something that we do very often, but if you're talking about a culture change, again, it needs to be sprinkled in and reinforced with the norms of how we do things. Not just an add-on, not just a thing from time to time, but this is just a functional piece of our day-to-day. And it's also about figuring out how to reward engagement, how to positively reinforce engagement with behavioral health and wellness, right? What we know from behavioral psychology is that one of the things that we know from that is that people really benefit from reinforcement, at least at the beginning. And then once the thing that's reinforced becomes the norm, you don't have to reinforce it in the same way or as much, right? But when you're teaching something new, when you're promoting something new, when you really want to emphasize a change, it's really helpful to positively reinforce that change. If it's just talk, and no actual resource and time and attention reinforcement, you can probably still get there, maybe, but it'll take a whole lot longer. So this is about slowly shifting the structure within the company to reinforce the culture change that you're looking for. The fourth step is to discuss and consult around how it's working. Get teams in across sectors to talk to each other. If you're a behavioral health agency or an outpatient clinic, start making connections with other outpatient clinics, doing some cross-agency consultation, learning how it's working in other places, what you can benefit from. Maybe they're doing something that you could adopt yourself that's working really well, or maybe you can learn what to avoid because it's not working well for another group, but you don't want to go down that same path yourself, so you can avoid doing that thing. So the discussion and consultation really allows you to hone in on success. And again, it can happen at every level. Leaders talking with other leaders, team members consulting with other teams in similar positions at different groups or different agencies, different clinics. But that discussion and consultation piece allows people doing the same kind of work to learn from each other. And it is way, way, way more effective to do that kind of learning than it is to listen to somebody on a webinar like outside telling you, right? Because you're learning from people who are in the trenches with you, doing the stuff. So that discussion and consultation piece really is helpful to reinforce that process too. And then the final step is to evaluate. Is it working, right? Are we doing all this stuff for nothing, or is it actually, are we making some headway here? So what you want to do is collect data as much as you can. It doesn't need to be exhaustive. You don't want to make people sit down and do a 30-minute survey, but it's about collecting data so you can compare where we were before versus how we are now. And you want to try and do that in a way that is not going to be a barrier. You want to get as much information as you can, and you want to use good measures and instruments, right? You don't want to use instruments that have some problems with psychometric validity. You want to make sure you're measuring what you intend to measure and not something completely different. There are lots of good measures for resilience and for components of resilience, and you can measure one aspect of that at the beginning and then do it 3 months in and then do it 6 months in and see. So improvement here in terms of, again, this topic of behavioral health culture change is around measurable positive growth, not just a lack of negative stuff. So if you think about neutral being in the middle, you don't want to think about measuring like, oh, well, you know, I shouldn't say that way. If this is neutral, you want to not just think about recovery to baseline, you want to also think about positive growth. So it's both sides. It's not just about the reduction of something rather than the addition of something else. There's a great question in the Q&A about resistance, and we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to talk about group dynamics and cohesion within a group. So hang on to that, because when people are in it together for a reason, you have a lot of options that you don't have when people are less cohesive in a group, for sure. Okay. Great questions. I love it. Thank you so much. Yes, we'll get to these. Some of these will come up. If I miss something in the chat or in the Q&A, please don't hesitate to bring my attention to it at the end of the webinar today. So now I'm going to switch from this sort of really high level view of these components that are needed into organizational concepts and group dynamics. So some of these are things some of you may have heard from and heard about before, and some of them might be new to you. I'm not sure, depending on what your background is. So the first concept I want to share is called reciprocal determinism. And that's a fancy way of saying that all of us as people get to influence the environment that we are part of, just as the environment influences us. So we cannot lose sight of that. We cannot lose sight of the power that we hold as individuals to contribute to something that's bigger than ourselves. It is pretty easy. I think it's easier to kind of get caught up in the culture of a place, especially when you're new, and swept along kind of in a current of things, rather than saying, actually, I'm an agent here, an agent of change. I can influence wellness, behavioral health, whatever the topic is. And it's a bidirectional relationship. This is not my idea, this concept. This was identified in the 1970s by Albert Bandura. Reciprocal determinism is a social cognitive concept that we influence the environment and the environment influences us. So there's a lot of power that we all have around there. Okay, some other organizational psych concepts. I love that middle picture there. I'll explain it in a second. So the first one is called the Ringelmann effect. And this is from, I want to say the 50s or something is when this was first identified. People become less productive when they work with other people. So you see the picture that's here. I think they're holding back something. I mean, from a physics standpoint, that's less work for each person, which is great, right? Less muscle power that's needed. But from an organizational productivity and cohesion and wellness standpoint, that's not great because the loss, the degree of effort and the degree of work that's being done and contributed goes down significantly when you are at one tiny little piece in a much bigger pond, right? Bigger pool of work. So just being aware of the tendency that we have to do that as humans. And that, you know, if you are a leader or in a managing position, it's really helpful to have smaller working teams that can be higher in cohesion, that are less likely to suffer from this Ringelmann effect. Social facilitation and social loafing go together. So social facilitation is when we get better at our performance when we're in the presence of other people. So that's in terms of like we perform better, and I'm using perform just because that's what the old research says, but it's not like, you know, tap dancing performance. It's not that at all. It's about the ability to work successfully on something when we are sort of being observed at things that we're moderately good at. So let me really explain this one. Social facilitation is something where we improve when somebody is there in proximity to us, not like observing our every little step and micromanaging, but when we're not operating totally in isolation. So we do better when we're not in isolation. And I'll give you an example. I'm not asking for a show of hands here, but think about the last time you actually went to the gym. It's been a minute for me, but anyway, the last time you went to the gym, if you were running on a treadmill or on any kind of exercising machine, and someone comes in and they jog right next to you, you're going to run a little bit faster just because there's someone else in proximity to you. That is a known thing. And we all kind of do that. It's less common to not do that. So that's because the task of running on a treadmill is considered a mild to moderately difficult task. It's not like really difficult. And if it's too hard for us, social facilitation doesn't exist. So for example, if I were asked in front of you all live to take a calculus test, I would not do well because calculus is really hard, right? But if it's a moderately difficult thing for me, like to do some pretty easy spelling words or something, I could do that and I would be more successful in front of a group of people. Another piece of really interesting research on this is that the guys who, there were old white dudes that identified this back in the day, they did a study with cockroaches, and they had cockroaches like run on a track kind of a thing, like they outlined a little track in a box, and they timed them to go from A to B. And cockroaches ran faster when they made little stands and had other cockroaches watching them run. Truly, I can send you the study on this. When we're being observed by other people, we perform better. That's what social facilitation is. The cockroaches also ran faster when they were being observed by other cockroaches, which is so strange. Yeah, it's a weird one. Social loafing, on the other hand, is when we don't do as well, and sort of on purpose, because nobody's going to be able to tell if we're actually doing it or not. So middle school choir is a great example, maybe. So it's when you don't sing as much. Your performance is more muted. I use the example of a choir just because it's very sort of a direct example that I can provide. But when you're thinking about a team project and like 17 people or 10 people are providing feedback on a document, but you can't tell who's providing what feedback, then social loafing is definitely going to occur, because it's like, oh yeah, I looked at that and I didn't have much to add, and there's no way to tell who did what. Group projects in school are the same kind of a thing. If you can't tell who does what, because individual contributions are minimized or anonymous, social loafing absolutely takes place. This is just something people do. It's not about personality style. It's not about conscientiousness. This is a human thing. All of these things are. And I think when you're thinking about your work group and the teams that you're part of, it's important to just be aware of this stuff. And where any potential improvement can be made as well. Okay, so how to minimize social loafing and increase social facilitation. So you increase identifiability. So if your name is associated with your work product, that helps. Minimize free writing by not letting people get credit for other people's work. Making and setting individualized goals. So I'm going to be responsible for A, B, and C, right? Increasing involvement, that's asking people for their participation. Getting people to weigh in on what they think about things is a big one for increasing social facilitation. Social compensation is recognizing the work, recognizing the effort that people put in, how hard it is, how much time something is taking, and then, identification with the group. If I care about what our team is doing, and I know that I have an important role in the work of our team, I'm going to increase my work in terms of how I feel about it. It's going to be better, and I'm not going to be engaged in social loafing as much, for sure. So hope that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Another concept, we're going to talk about self-efficacy in a minute when I get to individual variables, but the last piece here I think it's the last piece in group dynamics is something called collective efficacy. Oh, and cohesion. So collective efficacy is defined as your belief in your team's ability to get something done, to achieve a goal, to finish a product, right? Do you believe that your team in a collective sense is capable of doing X, Y, or Z? And it's important. Collective efficacy is really big in terms of what actually gets done, right? So a couple ways to do that. Really set and clarify the goals that the team has and who's responsible for what, so that it's not vague. You want to design teams really thoughtfully. I believe that a working team should always be in the single digits. There are times when it can't be or it shouldn't be, but in general, when you're talking about individualized contributions, you start getting above the single digits and it gets way more convoluted in terms of role and responsibility and who's doing what and who's responsible for what piece. So you want to be thoughtful about designing a work team that's really going to be effective and healthy, right? A healthy team, because people are buying into what am I doing here? What is my contribution, rather than like, oh, I'm just put on this team, but I don't have a voice. I don't have any efficacy to actually get something done. That feels poor, right? That's not a good outcome. And that also is going to be consistent with more burnout when it doesn't matter as much, right? When that sense of purpose is undermined. So being thoughtful about the design of teams, practicing in terms of the training that people go through, what it means to be part of a team, orienting people to the norms of your organization, and making sure that the resources and the distribution of responsibility is as even as it needs to be. Consulting on process, increasing efficacy by building communal perspective. What is our mission? What is our overall mission? What is our sense of purpose? What are the goals that we can really orient around as a group? I had the opportunity this quarter to teach a senior seminar class at Seattle U, and these are the seniors that graduated from high school in 2020. So they didn't have a high school graduation in most cases. And they graduated from college this year, and those in my senior seminar class, and they right from the get-go were hungry for a sense of purpose for what they were going to do in senior seminar. Like, we're seniors, this means something, this is new to us. Like, what are we going to agree on as a group, as a class? And so we created sort of rules and expectations for engagement in senior seminar: to be respectful of people's opinions, to comment on the concept, not the person, right? To be listening in an active way. Like, we sort of collectively identified, this is how we are going to agree to participate together. That stuff doesn't happen very much in an organizational setting. It's just like, here's a job to do, go do it. And there's not a lot of discussion around the process that's helpful to engage when you're doing the job, which really matters to people. Like, how you feel being part of a team is, I would argue, almost half of what it is to actually just be on the team and doing the work, right? It's a huge piece of it that we don't pay enough attention to, really. So if you think about a team approach, we know that these things that I've listed here are sort of reliably and consistently associated with increases in both effectiveness on the job and satisfaction with the work. So it's a win-win. Most of this stuff is a win-win, truly. Okay, so the desired outcomes. I put 3H here because it's healthy individual team members, high cohesion, and high productivity. Desired outcomes that we want healthy working groups to have. So I'm going to talk about high cohesion and high productivity. So the first thing is cohesion, this concept of cohesion. It's a little bit tricky because it has to be done in the right way. So it's not just cohesion, it's cohesion in the right, healthy way. Then I'll explain that. So cohesion tends to lead to increased member satisfaction. I really feel like I'm part of something here, right? It's related to decreased turnover and decreased stress. And it leads to this esprit de corps, which is feelings of pride and connection to other people in the team or working group. However, right, the sort of dark side of strong cohesion is that they can be more emotionally conforming and more emotionally demanding. They expect, it's like, well, we are all doing this. Don't you belong? And that is dangerous, right? You can see where that gets a little bit unsafe, maybe, or unhealthy for people. You don't want to exert pressure to conform. You want people to willingly and creatively and safely find a way to contribute their perspective and their experience and ideas to the group. So in order to be beneficial to the group, it has to be healthy. It needs to allow room for viewpoints. It's not all, we just think this way, this is how we do it, right? It's about entertaining different things. And there is nothing ever that is said that is, you can't have compassion and disagreement at the same time that I'm aware of. Right? Those things are not mutually exclusive. So it's about listening to different ideas and making sure that you can have cohesion without conformity, really, because conformity can be dangerous in terms of outcomes. Jamie, it looks like you have your hand up. I'm not sure if there's something you can add to the Q&A. Or if there's a technical question to put in the chat, but yeah, I would love to answer it. If you've got a question, I can answer. So how we enhance cohesion is three-pronged. We talk about coordinating efforts through teamwork. So this is reducing social loafing, increasing the value and the recognition of individual contributions. This is about enhancing unity, finding common ground, solidarity, like I belong here because I know something about the other people in the group and I care about these people. One specific way to do this, and this sort of goes consistently with a couple of the questions that I've seen, is when you're working in a virtual environment, maybe some of you are on teams that are with a bunch of new people that you don't know very well, or even people that you've worked with for a while, but you still don't know very well because your group is all about the work getting done rather than about the individual people that are part of it. And so you need to build in things to your team meetings where you get to know the other people that you're working with as people. So one of the things that a couple of the groups that I've been part of has done is something called question of the day. And it's actually ended up being question of the week. It was for a weekly team huddle. And there was one question that everybody had to answer, right? You didn't have to, you could pass if you wanted to, but it was something like, what's a book that you're reading lately that you really liked? Or what's the best hole in the wall restaurant that is near your location, right? Because we were working all over the state. Or what is my favorite question of the day is, what's the weirdest thing you have in your refrigerator right now? Right? You get to learn a lot of strange things and interesting things about your coworkers when you ask question of the day. You learn about what they like and what they don't like, and maybe you learn things that you have in common, and it helps increase cohesion because it increases connection and caring. I will make a little asterisk here. It is a big mistake for leaders to engage in something like question of the day, and you go from one person to the next and everybody answers the question of the day, and there's no discussion or recognition of the answer, right? It's like, oh, that's interesting. Next. All that does is decrease connection. It feels very off-putting because it feels like nobody was listening anyway, so I'm not going to bother to share anything about myself, right? So there has to be, you're not just jumping through hoops because you're supposed to do this. You're intentionally using this activity as a way to get to know more about the people that you work with. And the only way to do that is to have some interaction around it, not just answer the question next, right? That does not work. It completely defeats the purpose. And it can in fact reinforce disconnection. So you don't want to do that. All right. The third piece of cohesion is developing collective efficacy by sort of taking some risks and doing some things and doing some hard work and then proving to yourself that as a team, you're capable of doing it. Right? That's what reinforces collective efficacy. It's sort of proving to yourself, man, we can do a lot. We can get a lot done under difficult circumstances. We're capable. And that definitely does feel really good. Okay. Okay. I like these questions that are showing up in the Q&A. All right. McClellan's acquired needs. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk about motivation for a minute because it's really helpful to understand some of the things that are motivating people when they're showing up at work. This is a theory that's been around for a long time. I actually have a PDF document of this, and when we get to the end, I'll share it with Amy, or I'll post it. I'll post it for you all, where you can sort of do a little self-assessment on which is your highest need. Everybody tends to have one of these that's higher than the other. It's just a really brief assessment document. I don't know why I didn't think to share it earlier, but I didn't. So the need for achievement is when you just are really motivated by success, right? You're motivated by performance and mastery of a topic or a area of expertise or work. The need for power is the need to control or to master or influence other people or the work of a group. There's a value on status and reputation and recognition. It's not necessarily bad. I don't want to say any of these are good or bad. They can all be used for bad, but they're not bad inherently. It's how they're used. So all humans have all three, but what ends up happening is if you think of it like pieces of the pie, if you have a higher need for power, then you're going to have less of a need for affiliation or belonging. There's only so much of needs. And so everybody's proportion is different in terms of achievement, power, and affiliation. So that third one there is affiliation, and that's the need to associate and be part of something bigger, and to live or work in a community with others. I would be willing to guess that for those of us who are more comfortable working at home, and working in a virtual setting, maybe this is lower. I don't know. I haven't seen research on that. But it's possibility that when there's an in-person component to the work, that need for affiliation is higher, depending on what kind of work you do. I'm actually speculating on that. I don't know, because I haven't seen the research. So yeah, those three needs, and just sort of some self-awareness around what might be motivating you and what might be motivating some of the people that you work with on your teams. Khalid, that's a great question. Could you put it in the Q&A for me, please? I love that question. Thank you. Okay, so the next piece, oh, you did. I didn't see it. I did. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to talk about is called the expectancy theory of motivation. And this one is, I find, very, very powerful. Because what it says is that in order for someone to be motivated at work, all three pieces, all three components have to be in place. And it gets pretty tricky. So self-efficacy is the one that each of us can develop ourselves. It is defined as your belief in your ability to achieve a desired outcome. Do I believe I can do X, Y, or Z, right? If I work hard, I can finish this project early. Instrumentality is where it gets tricky from an organizational perspective. That is oh, sorry, I spelled that wrong. The belief that your achievement of a particular goal will result in a desired outcome. So if I finish the project early, I'll be able to choose my next project, right? You might be able to pick up on the idea that instrumentality is not in the hands of the individual. Instrumentality varies by policy and by leadership, and it depends on what the circumstances are within the working group. So there's less individual control that we have over instrumentality. And the third one is valence. And valence is just how important the outcome is. Like choosing the next project is very important. If I were to give you an academic example of this, self-efficacy would be like, if I work hard, I can get an A on this paper, right? Instrumentality is if I keep getting A's on my papers, I'll get an A in the class. And then valence is if I getting an A in the class is really important for my GPA and for me, right? So the theory here about expectancy says that you have to have all three of these pieces to be motivated. And if one of them is missing, you're not going to be motivated. Instrumentality, I find, is the trickiest one because it is about making sure that the work that people do is clearly related to some sort of a desirable outcome. And sometimes there are processes in place where people put in a lot of effort and they do a lot of hard and very good work. And for some reason or another, it is not translated into an outcome that matters. It's either it takes too long to get there, or it's not, we have to rethink things, or there's a structuring thing. I don't know. There's lots of examples that I can give you, but I don't want to throw any of my previous teams and groups I've worked with under the bus. I will give you one example from my own academic experience. That I had a teacher in graduate school who had never taught before. And I knew that if I worked hard, I was going to get an A, at least on a test. But where it went wrong is that this teacher, the way that she was designing the tests, I'm not even making this up, this is a true story. She would stand and read to the class from the textbook. And then the tests for the class were all multiple choice, which you'd think, okay, maybe that's easier. However, the multiple choice tests were like, A is this, B is this, C is this. D is A, sometimes C, E is F except for G when Y, and there were like 12 items for the multiple choice. It wasn't simple. And so even if you studied really hard, because it was so convoluted in terms of how the tests were organized, you couldn't do as well as was possible for you. So what I felt in that example is that my instrumentality was very, very low because I knew I was capable of it, but it didn't matter how hard I studied because the tests were bananas, right? And I really did need an A in the class. So I had high self-efficacy and high valence, but instrumentality was really low. So all three things have to be in place. And what happens when they're not is that motivation tanks a little bit, and that can be dangerous for people too. Okay. Self-efficacy is the one we can do something about. So that's the one I really want to focus on right now. It is correlated with all kinds of positive outcomes, really, really good things. High self-efficacy is correlated with perseverance and confidence and sort of this initiative around problem solving and seeking novel things. And low self-efficacy is correlated with, even physical health problems and giving up and futility and just sort of this, I don't know. It's kind of how how maybe some compassion fatigue might look, right? If you just feel like I just can't anymore. I'm just not capable for whatever reason, right? So self-efficacy is really important, and takes a little bit of time to develop, but we know how to do it. So if you want to help yourself, or if you want to help someone on your team develop more self-efficacy, there are 4 ways to do it. The first one is through performance. It's practicing, making, and achieving small goals, small goals, so that you're proving to yourself again and again and again that you're capable of success. I did it. I did it. I did it. You're teaching yourself what you're capable of. The second way to build self-efficacy is to watch people who are similar to you, right? If they can do it, so can I. That one is tricky when it comes to the frequency of models that are similar to you. Maybe there aren't a lot of people in your sector of work who walk, talk, act, dress like you, right? Maybe there are differences there, and it's hard to find representative models. I know that this is something that a lot of sectors struggle with for sure. So that's a tough one, but it's something that we're working on, I think, developing. And then the third and the fourth ones are the smallest percentages of how we increase self-efficacy. The third one is getting support from other people, like a cheerleader, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, a leader, saying, you can do it, I believe in you, right? And then the last one on the bottom is teaching yourself how to control your physiological response when things feel hard. It's like, am I nervous or am I excited? And sort of working to convince yourself, I'm excited, like, I think I got this, it's going to be okay, rather than, I'm panicking. So it's controlling that physical response. And this is how it breaks down in terms of the relative power that each one of those things has for building self-efficacy. Proving to yourself you can. This is the vicarious learning. If they can do it, so can I. And then these two are only about 5% each. This is someone telling you can, and this is sort of proving to yourself that you're not anxious. So 75% of this pie is making and achieving small goals. Really being careful not to set goals that are way too high, because you're gonna, if you fail to meet them, what you're doing is reinforcing that experience of failure, and you don't want to be doing that. Okay. So this is what we want to do to get more. Exposing people to success experiences, making and achieving small goals to increase performance attainment. Exposing people to appropriate models who perform successfully, right, at doing whatever the thing is that you're trying to get done, to enhance that experience. Providing verbal persuasion, encouraging people that they have the ability to give it a shot and try it, right? Sometimes that's, like a counselor or a therapist or a parent, anybody really, as long as it's realistic and genuine. And then the fourth one is strengthening your physical response to anxiety, right? Thinking about stamina and nutrition and exercise, sleeping, getting enough sleep, right? If you're not getting enough sleep, it becomes exponentially harder to control the fight or flight or freeze response. So rest is really an important piece of that. I know there is at least one other webinar where I talk about that. Okay, so it looks like there are some questions about this in the chat. So maybe this will address some of them. If it's not going to, I will follow up with the rest as soon as I'm done. So don't worry. There's a lot of great questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much for putting them in the Q&A. Individual variables as far as the group and team dynamics. So I'm going to talk about insight and awareness, communication skills, personality style, and coping mechanisms. These are all 4 of these things, among others, right? But these are the ones that I picked as being sort of the most meaningful and important contributors to the dynamics of the group. So the first one is insight and awareness. How do you react when things change unexpectedly? When someone new joins the group and it changed the dynamics, when somebody unexpectedly leaves, when there's a tragedy amongst one of the members of the group, right? What are your red flag or hot button issues? Like, what are the things when people do X, Y, or Z, it really upsets you, right? What are the things that make you uncomfortable or make you nervous when they come up? What are the conversations that you try to avoid because of your past and historical experiences? I'm not saying you should always dive in, but I think you got to start with being aware of what those things are so that you can appropriately and carefully engage with the work that you're doing in a way that makes the most sense for you, right? Using the right approach when the topic or the subject matter or the work product itself might be difficult for you for some reason or another. And then the other piece of insight that's really important in a work context is who do you need to reach out for when you need help, right? Who do you ask for help? Where's the level of trust amongst coworkers? Like, is it there? Is it not there? What are some ways to contribute to more cohesion? If you would like to see more trust in the group, what are ways that you can contribute to being trustworthy, right, to other people? I'm not saying any individual needs to take on the burden of all of that for their whole team, not by any means. That's not appropriate. But it's about sort of walking the talk, the way that you want to contribute to the team and the way that you'd like other people to contribute to the team. So individually, it starts with insight and awareness and then moves on to communication. So how are your active listening skills? Could you brush up on those a little bit? How do you react when you're dealing with an issue at home? How do you bring that to work or not, right? Are you able to compartmentalize? Are you able to not? Sometimes it's impossible. And when it's impossible, then who do you ask for help in terms of like some space or a shift in your work that day or some boundaries around what you can or can't do, right? We all have personal life issues that interfere with our ability to contribute. As like that's just part of life, right? It's not about work, it's about our whole life picture. And so when we're angry or sad or we're upset about something that's happening at work, there are different avenues for addressing that. When we're angry or sad or upset about something that's happening in our personal life, how do we filter or work through that or take the time away that we need to address that issue? That's all part of communication skills, is building on awareness and insight to communicate effectively, healthy boundaries, and also what you need. And then the last piece there is, are you able to regulate yourself in order to de-escalate other people? So let's say you're doing fine, you're having an okay day or an okay week, but somebody else on the team is really not having a good day, and you can tell that whatever they're bringing to the team is not about the team. It's about something else that's happening in their personal life. Depending on your relationship with them, you're going to approach that in different ways, right? If you're in a leadership role, you might ask to have a 10-minute one-on-one and just check in, like, hey, can we check in? What's going on? If you're a coworker and a colleague with them, you can shoot them a message and be like, hey, you want to walk outside, take a minute. I just want to make sure you're doing okay, right? There's ways to check in on people, as friends and as colleagues, for sure. Okay, the third thing here is personality style. This is recognizing if you tend to be more introverted, then what that means, right, isn't that you don't like people. Introversion and extroversion. Introversion is that you get your energy, you restore your energy by having alone time, right? And extroversion is that you get energy by being around other people. So it's where your sources of energy come from. It's not about being outgoing or friendly. Lots of introverted people are very friendly. It's just about energy, right? And extroverted people also are not always friendly. So yeah, it's about how to tell when you need space, when you need time to sort of recover energy and where that is for you. How aware are you of what other people need? Are you in your own head most of the time, or can you perceive, like even on a Zoom call, so-and-so is a little bit off today? Like how much attention and energy do you have to pay attention to like sort of what other people are bringing and what they might need? And I'm not saying that there's a bad or worse, or like a bad or good. Like there's not like it's all good or all bad. It varies. And so there are nuances to all of this stuff. This is all personality pieces that are individually different for us, each of us. When you're working on a team, my computer likes to do these pretend bubbles and all these weird side effects with AI. I don't know. Sorry. How much independence do you like when you're working on a team? I like a lot of independence personally. I don't like people checking in and asking me things. I just want to finish it and get it done. But I do work with a couple of colleagues who like to work very interdependently and constantly sort of check in on how the process is going and this and that. And that's not my style, right? And that's okay. But I need to be able to voice that a little bit or to ask for more independence if that's something that I need. And then the last piece is, your awareness, again, back to insight and awareness on go-to options for pick-me-ups. That is going to vary dramatically based on personality. Do you like novel experiences? Do you like quiet alone time? Like, what are the ways that you pick yourself up, that you restore and recover your energy? Individual differences, all of these. But thinking about how your individual differences in terms of personality influence your group, your team that you're part of. Coping mechanisms. All right. This is a big one because they show up in group dynamics all the time. It is really helpful for a team when people can develop insight and awareness to the point where they're able to say out loud ahead of time, I'm dealing with some stuff. You don't have to be specific. I'm dealing with some hard stuff. I'm going to need some extra space this week to sort of get in front of it rather than pulling back and being abrupt and being short and then say, oh, sorry, I was dealing with some stuff. Right? It is helpful for the group when people can be as aware and then as upfront and communicative about those mechanisms that they need as possible. It's harder for everyone and it requires more repair when it's done after the fact. So questions to ask. Do you have a personal coping plan? How much time in your downtime and off time from work do you spend escaping and avoiding versus restoration and recovery, right? If you're like most of us, that's very blurry, that line. And we often confuse one with the other. And then the other last one here is, what is your indicator? How do you tell when you need space? What's going on with you? Is it that your tension is really strong, like your neck and shoulders are really tense? Is it that you're not sleeping well? Like, how do you tell when you need space from your team, your work group, etc.? What are the indicators? Okay, so these are the desired outcomes. And the last 3 slides that I'm going to cover before I get to your questions, which I think are really fantastic. So let's get into it. How do we get to healthy team members, high cohesion, high productivity? For healthy team members, as individual people, what we want to be looking for group dynamics, right, is that behavioral health is prioritized from a values and a resources standpoint. It's not just talked about, it's that we actively practice wellness for the team. We're all engaged with it. We check in with each other. We respect time off. That there are resources and timing that are oriented around behavioral health. That is one way to produce healthy team members. Number 2, healthy communication is an active practice between group and team members. You don't leave things alone. You don't let it fester. You are candid, but in an appropriate way. That you don't have to be direct all the time, but you can be straightforward about identifying what the issues are and be willing to talk about them, right? Healthy communication practice is a little bit more transparent than most of us are used to, but it's really important. Active coping is something that is practiced and modeled across all levels. This is not just something that most of us here are doing. This is a leadership thing. This is something that people in all positions of leadership can model. Like, I'm taking a day because am prioritizing some stuff for my family, and that's what I want to focus on. Just like being transparent about that is a huge thing for people that work with you. And yeah, that active coping, like just taking a moment, like I'm getting really worked up. I'm going to take some deep breaths and come back to the meeting in a second. That's a really, really powerful way to model those approaches too. And that healthy boundaries also between work and personal time are encouraged, supported, and modeled. I can't say enough about this one because this is the biggest predictor of burnout, is the lack of boundaries. It's really, really unhelpful for a manager or a leader to say, don't work on your off time. Don't check email at 10 o'clock at night. And then what they get is email in their inbox from their manager at 2 o'clock in the morning on a weekend. You don't want to contradict yourself. You don't want to be hypocritical about boundaries. You want to model what you're asking people to do. And if you want to work at 2 o'clock in the morning, so be it, right? But put a delayed send on your email so that it doesn't show up in people's inboxes during off work time, right? There's ways around it because people work at all kinds of funky times right now, and that's fine. But it's not expecting other people to do the same thing. Excuse me. Yeah. Okay, so cohesion, especially if you're working with a virtual team or a partially virtual team, you have to allow team members to get the chance to know each other as people and as human beings and in other roles besides just their job role, as a parent or as a sibling or as a friend, as a community member, like what are they into, right? And not just as a job role. Individual contributions are recognized and effort is celebrated. Even if something doesn't get all the way finished, or for whatever, maybe there's a bureaucratic reason that the product was stopped, that the effort that went into it is celebrated and recognized so that it's not for nothing. That the contributions matter, and we call out, what people are contributing to those things. That the core values and purpose or the mission of the team are clear to everyone. We know why we're here. We know why we're doing the work that we're doing. And we recognize that, yeah, it's hard, but it matters. It's important. Everybody's familiar with mission statement. Like, what are we doing here? And that the individual pieces of purpose that are associated with the mission statement are clear and related to job role, right? I know how my job role contributes to this bigger picture, because that reinforces purpose, which is part of resilience. And then the role of each team member in a bigger picture, right, is clear and acknowledged as well. So all of those things are going to increase cohesion. And then the last piece here is high productivity. High productivity is not unrelated to healthy team members and high cohesion. It's actually the same side of the coin. They're all connected to each other, and it's not like one goes up and the others go down. So high productivity is achieved when individual contributions are valued and visible, and a sense of purpose is built into the work. Appreciation and thanks become the norm for the group rather than this random thing that happens every once in a while. And opportunities for growth and challenge are available, right? There's opportunities for growth. People aren't stagnant. There's a sense of purpose that's reinforced by new learning, new challenges, things that are a little tricky and hard that push people a little bit, but that are going to pay off somehow. Not necessarily financially, although that's great when that happens, but maybe with recognition or with an opportunity to contribute to the body of work in a different way. So that growth and challenge piece is a big deal. To the extent that someone in the team is really high on need for achievement, opportunities for growth and challenge are even more important. If someone is less high on need for achievement, maybe they're higher on need for affiliation, maybe the growth and challenge piece isn't as big of a deal to them. But if someone is high on need for achievement, they need to know what are the next steps in their job role. What are they aiming for here? Because that's very reinforcing and very motivating. And this is just an aside. I can throw study after study at this, but 4/10s is the way to go. 4-day work week is the sweet spot in terms of lack of burnout and productivity. Productivity does not go down. It just doesn't. And I would even argue like 4/8s instead of 4/10s, but that's just me. Yeah, something to consider. We've got lots of data. This is not my idea. It's not my idea at all. But I think there are some sectors that push against that quite strongly. So anyway. Okay, thank you for listening. I have some time. 12 hours today. Oh my goodness. Thanks very much. I will take some questions. It looks like there are a bunch, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing of the slides. I think Amy was going to read the questions, and I think everything, anybody who asked a question in the chat, please be sure to put it in the Q&A. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. This was so wonderful. Thank you so much, Kira. It's amazing. There were so many thoughts going on in my mind as you were talking about all of this, showing us the slides. I was busily writing things down, and just, I think overall that message of, looking within yourself and modeling really goes a long way.
Yeah.
Whether you're on a team or you're a leader, you're a manager, supervisor, it's just so important. Start small.
Yeah.
Start within yourself and model. And so, sorry, I'm going to plug in a couple more questions, and we're just going to go through them, start at the top,
Sure.
just see if we left out anything from the presentation. First question is, if staff resist and are reluctant to accept changes, what strategies can be employed to navigate the resistance and foster a more receptive and collaborative environment?
That's a great question. The first step is to learn to see if you can figure out or ask them why they're reluctant. Post-pandemic, or I should say not post, but like 4 years after 2020, one of the biggest contributors to people's resistance to change is that so much change was forced on all of us. It wasn't adaptive change. It was like we had to, right? And whether we wanted to or not. And, so, and with all the different responses that go along with that. And when people are forced to change, and we get tired of doing that over and over again, one of the consequences of that is that we dig our heels in with additional change that's optional. It's like, no, that's too much change. I'm done. I can't handle it anymore. We're just going to do it the same way. And it feels threatening. It feels threatening to people, especially in 2024 when so much change just happened without our buy-in, I guess. And so I would approach it, if I'm a manager and I have staff that are very resistant to change, I would approach it from a threat perspective. They feel threatened, they feel scared, they feel uncertain about what that means. And so it needs to be from a very reassuring, like, actually big benefits here. Like, it might not all go the way we expect, but really addressing the threat response piece, and the fear, the reasons for the fear, we're acknowledging and validating, yeah, like we're all pretty tired of change and we're all tired of adaptation. However, this one doesn't have to be threatening, right? This thing that we're trying to do doesn't have to be a scary change, and really validating and recognizing it from that perspective is going to go a long way to reducing fear. And when fear goes down, people are much more open to new ideas. Yeah.
That's perfect. And yes, notice that too, within our behavioral health workforce, there's always been changes and we kind of roll with it. We may complain a little bit, but yeah, after a pandemic and something that we were not, in charge of or foreseen, it is, things are more threatening. It's hard.
Yeah.
Next question. This is about survey recommendations. Do you have any survey recommendations? This was early on, I think, before you talked about the acquired needs assessment from McClellan's.
Before that. Oh, yeah, I should send that to you. I don't know what kinds of surveys. I mean, yes, but it depends on what you want to ask. So here a couple of things I would recommend. There's lots of surveys out there. If you're going to use a strong instrument, you want to make sure that the psychometric properties of the instrument are valid, right? You don't want to pick just something online that's usually free. You want to find something that has a support, like from an academic journal. If an instrument is published, if the items from the instrument are published in an academic journal, then it's publicly available, right? You're allowed to use the instrument if the items from the instrument are published, like in the reference list or in the end of the article. So anything like that would be good if it has good psychometric properties. What you don't want to do is be collecting data using an instrument that isn't measuring what you think it's measuring. So depending on what you had in mind there, I have a bunch that I can send as a suggestion. But you just have to be careful with the validity of the instrument. I guess there's lots of free resources that are available. Google Scholar is a good way to start. Just making sure that AI didn't come up with it, right? That it's an actually valid, tested resource. And there's a lot of really good ones to find. Yeah.
That's great. This is a great question. How do we balance the individual recognition and task sharing with the workload across multiple shifts?
So my first inclination with answering that is that even though the big task is shared by 3 people, let's say I'm thinking day, like afternoon and overnight shift, what that one person did during their shift still matters. And so it has to be a way of parsing out what somebody did during their shift, and giving them credit for that piece of the work rather than the overall picture. Then the entire team can be celebrated when the final, like the patient is released from the hospital or the final thing is done. Then that's a team recognition. But in the meantime, like what you did on your shift is still your work, and to get some validation and recognition for those individual pieces. That's what comes to mind. Yeah.
I think you answered this a little bit in your presentation, but I'll just read it anyways. See if there's anything extra. How do we build a sense of closeness and connection with our team members without crossing professional boundaries or invading their personal space?
Yeah.
And additionally, how do we create a friendly and approachable atmosphere while still respecting cultural differences and individual comfort levels?
There are a variety of I would say safe and appropriate icebreaker questions that you can find online. the more important than the content of the icebreaker questions or the questions of the day, more important than the content is the process that you establish for what's safe and what's not safe. That there's a collective agreement about recognizing that you can't maintain confidentiality, let's say, in a workplace setting, right? So you're not asking people to divulge anything that, that they're not comfortable divulging, that there's no pressure of expectation that you have to participate or you have to answer that day. You can pass. And that's just a norm. So it's really more about the group norms of communication than it is about the content of the individual questions. But having said that, there are lots of good examples of sort of broad get to know you things that are considered appropriate and safe for the workplace that you can find online too. So I would say focus on the communication norms first. It's about respect for the person, even if you don't agree with the idea, right? It's about showing respect and listening to various, and also when you're just asking people to share something more trivial about themselves, there's not as much pressure on that too. So, yeah.
I'm going to kind of try and group the next 3 questions together a little bit. It's all about toxicity, growing a team or being within a team when you, well, first off, how do you grow a team when and increase sharing and being together after a toxic coworker leaves? And then also, how do you create change when the organization itself or maybe leadership has that toxicity?
Okay. So with excuse me, that first one, the first one, it depends on what your role is. I would say if you are a leader in a role where a toxic coworker has left, your job is to establish and maintain safety for the team, meaning that people are not going to be willing to participate in group discussions and sharing unless they feel safe to do so. And please keep in mind too, that from a psychological perspective, being uncomfortable is different than being unsafe, right? Being uncomfortable is where a lot of growth happens and a lot of strong connection and good work comes. That's not the same as feeling unsafe. And so there's a really important distinction between those two things. And if you're in a leadership role, you want to maintain and establish group safety for people to feel like they're able to contribute and there's going to be respect for their opinions and ideas. And when someone who has been a toxic contributor to that is leaving, I think it's a good opportunity to reinforce those norms of communication. Like, let's go back and let's do it together. Let's work on, gosh darn it, the computer did that thought bubble again. Let's work on establishing and maintaining these norms that we all want to contribute to. So really discussing the norms. If you're a team member and not a leader in that role with a toxic coworker, keeping in mind your own willingness to lead by example and to contribute to a group in a way that's consistent with your core values, right? To be compassionate, to whatever those things are, to be a good listener to others, just contribute in a way that is meaningful and matters to you. Yeah. And when it's leadership, when it's above, when the organization itself doesn't want to change,
they're not wanting to change, right? There's,
don't forget the concept of reciprocal determinism. So you may be limited in terms of the big picture of shifting the whole thing, but boy, it is so powerful what an individual person can do and how you can influence a team and then how the team can influence the group at large. And then the group at large can influence the organization. So even if from a high level leadership position, you're not seeing the kind of culture change you want to see, don't underestimate the power that individual people can have from the bottom up of that kind of thing. For sure. It is a big deal. Sorry, I'm turning on my do not disturb. There was another one. Sorry, there was one. Did we skip it on valence? If valence is different.
Yeah. Sorry, I just took it out of the box. But yes, that's the same. So when team members have differing thoughts about outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I mean, that is normal. Nobody wants the same things exactly out of work. Some people value different outcomes. And it's not always possible to meet everybody individually where they are with what with what are the outcomes that matter to them, but you want to try and you want to acknowledge individual differences to the extent you can. You might be limited in terms of options, right? But you want to sort of try to categorize it, like we call categorical variable. Like maybe it's more time off, maybe it's public recognition, maybe it's advancement opportunity. Maybe those are, I'm just throwing those out there. Maybe those are 3 categories, right? And really to find out and ask people what are the reinforcers that work for them, what are the things that they want to pursue. You want it to be fair, right? You want it to be equal in terms of opportunity for the things that matter, for the positive reinforcers. So there are policies around what you can and can't offer for sure. But it's normal for the valence to be different for everybody, right? An A in a class means something very different for student 1 versus student 15. It's just different. Oh, go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So this person is asking, are there any thoughts on getting on the wrong foot in a high turnover setting? So what's the impression on getting back on track? So I'm guessing this is, we're in a high turnover setting. And how do you get back maybe onto the right foot?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's really about with whomever you have that's on the team to establish, to sit down and get right on the same page with what we want our cultural norms to be, so that when new people come along and are added to the group, that there's some sort of a framework that you're trying to include people as in part of. Like, these are the things we value. These are the things we want to reinforce and we want to sort of bolster up. Now, having said that, now that you're a new person in the group, how do you feel like you can contribute to these concepts, right, in an individual way? So it's about taking a little bit of time when things are changing so much to like set some structural pieces in place, like basic core values of the team, and then making sure that each person individually feels like there's a way that works for them that they can contribute to those values. That's what if I understand it correctly, that's what I would do, rather than feeling like everything's haphazard all the time, because you want to get some kind of structure for sure.
Definitely. Thank you. This question is, I've been told that I shouldn't say, quote, thank you for staff meeting work expectations. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I'll just be blunt. There's something called, in developmental psychology, there's something called labeled praise. And labeled praise is when you say thank you to kids. It's a developmental thing. Like, I have a 6-year-old, and when he does not argue with me about putting on his shoes, I will say, thank you for putting on your shoes, even though that's an expectation that he puts on his shoes. Thank you for sitting quietly in your seat. Thank you for keeping your bottom on the chair when we're eating dinner. And when you just say thank you and reinforce the specific thing, it increases those behaviors. So it doesn't matter if it's an expectation or a norm, right? Is there anybody that like hates to hear thank you? I feel like saying thank you is pretty much one of the easiest things you can do to really reinforce those sort of social norms. And there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think it hurts things at all. Now, not everybody likes to hear thank you in the same way. Some people like it verbally. Some people like it just in terms of time and sort of, spending time in different ways. It's not always sort of an email call out or having your name read in a meeting, not like that. But so the way people like to hear thank you is different, but saying thank you is a good thing in general, period.
Agree, and very easy to do and cost effective. What strategies can a leader employ to build trust and foster a positive team dynamic when dealing with prevalent gossip issues? And how can they effectively address and transform this behavior into more constructive and respectful communication?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind there is that you want to establish a system where people feel like they can provide feedback anonymously or to share their concerns. If they're gossiping, if it's gossiping about personal life stuff, that's a personality, that tends to be more of a personality dynamic, and there's less you can do. If people are gossiping about stuff that's going on with a work group, then you want to try and create a formal structure within the team for how to address complaints, concerns, like this is how we do this here, to make sure that criticisms and complaints and concerns are recognized and dealt with and not ignored, right? Because we don't want, and you can say this very explicitly, we don't want to create a culture of gossip and things happening behind the scenes. We want to be direct. We want to be transparent about these processes. So this is what we're going to establish and try to practice and maintain.
I love that you also emphasize that, clarifying why you're doing it, making it transparent. It's huge because in my mind too, as you were talking, I was thinking, oh, but some people could take that as very demeaning and then it just shoots the gossip up more. But if you're very clear and transparent, I love it. Yes. Somebody's asking, can you send information regarding the 4-10-hour days, please? And thank you. So the research that you have about
there's a lot. I mean, I could collate it or ask one of my students to collate it. There's so much on Google Scholar. You just research optimal work hour schedule for productivity and job satisfaction, and it's going to show up consistently. So there's lots of research. Sorry. Yeah. 4-10s or 4-8s.
I like 4-8s.
Yeah, we're getting there. They did a huge nationwide survey where they tested that and studied that just in the last couple of years. And sure enough, people are a lot happier and they get the same amount done. So,
So we have a couple more questions left. One of them is, do you have any resources on making culture change in a behavioral health setting for more workplace wellness?
Yeah.
I feel we expect staff to practice self-care and wellness on their own, but don't feel we talk about it enough or practice it collectively.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the first step, is for everybody to get on board transparently with saying, we're not just going to keep talking about this, we're actually going to do it. Number two, that means also leadership support for saying no to things and saying, I don't have the capacity to take on 5 more clients. I don't. And recognizing that if you are a compassionate person as a core value, that your compassion needs to extend to yourself and not just to the people that you're trying to serve in behavioral health. Those of us who do behavioral health support and medical services tend to care about other people's well-being and forget that if we do so at the exclusion of our own well-being, we are not going to be able to do the work for very long. So this is not a selfish choice to say no. It's not a selfish choice to establish better boundaries and to practice it collectively as a team. It's necessary to be able to continue the supportive work well into the future.
Great advice. Great advice. This next question is a little bit longer. So, post-COVID, with all the forced changes, businesses are returning to offices and removing some of the changes, such as, telework, hybrid schedules. Yes, people feel threatened, and the workforce is diminished as a result.
Yeah.
There's huge shifts occurring, as well as affirming efficacy of telework and productivity. How do we revert to the old per diem or hybrid per diem and get buy-in from new and existing coworkers?
Yeah, I mean, I think where we are right now in 2024 is about designing work culture in a very different way than it's ever. I don't see it as a reversal personally. It's never going to go back to the way it was before 2020. It's just not. And it's never going to be fully remote either, because humans are social and we need social interaction with people. And so what we have to figure out how to do is to sort of maximize this idea of collective something in a hybrid format, right? What does it look like when some people are in person and some people are online, and really maximizing that collective efficacy and that cohesion, even if people are not physically in the same spot. I do not have a rule book for that. All I can give you are like some best practices that we know generally work. But I think that is a question for the much bigger picture that we're all trying to figure out right now as we go along. We've never done this before as humans, right? So we get to sort of try to sort out these norms and establish these practices as we go. And we can build on what we know has worked in the past, but that's not always going to fit in these virtual hybrid settings. So I don't have a clear answer to that one because it's new. It's very new. Yeah.
This goes back to your other answer. What should we do if we get resistance by saying no when our capacity is maxed out?
Yeah. I don't know what you mean by resistance exactly, but a lot of it comes down to knowing that you're saying no for the reasons that you need to. in terms of your personal capacity and separating yourself from how other people feel about that, which is very hard to do. I'm not saying it's easy to do. But if you truly need that boundary right then, and many of us do, then resistance can happen on their end, but you still need to do what you need to do. And I know that's sort of easy for me to say, and I recognize that it's not always easy to do. But if you need the break and you need the space and you just can't, period. And other people can feel any which way they want about it, but it doesn't make it untrue. So the boundaries thing is really tough. I totally see that, and I respect that. Okay.
Sorry, I'm reading the question too. There's a lot of numbers.
Highly effective. Can I read that out loud? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Can an employee be considered highly effective and self-managed if they consistently complete their tasks and achieve their goals within a shorter time frame, say 6 hours, and then use the remaining 2 hours for self-care and personal development rather than working a traditional 8 hours a day to reach 40 hours a week? I don't know that I can answer that question. It would depend on what the rules are where you work. Conceptually, sure. Conceptually, but I don't know if that would be allowed or not allowed. In my mind, from a psychological lens and an org psych lens, if the work gets done and the person is happy, yay, that's a win-win. If the work doesn't get done or there's a different consequence, then different options need to be considered. But yeah, man, there's an importance in adaptability. And I guess that's one thing that the pandemic, it forced us to do this, but it's also not a bad thing, is that we have to figure out how to adapt in a way that maintains health for people. So, and as much as virtual options are tough sometimes because technology makes us available when we don't want to be available or can't be, just because the tech makes it so that we can be available doesn't mean that we should. And so, yeah, prioritizing different ways to get things done and being flexible with stuff is important. Yeah. So that can lead to something being called insubordinate and jobless. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not putting a roadmap out for saying, yeah, I'm saying boundaries are important and they're healthy for people. And I think that especially in community mental health, actually, it becomes essential for providers to figure out how to take care of themselves in a way that works for them and maintain their own mental health, because it does become physically impossible to help other people when you become compromised yourself from burnout and compassion fatigue. So that's it. Yeah, there's no easy answer there, but I appreciate your comment, Sharani.
I'm going to add into in behavioral health, community settings, coming from that world myself. Yep. And as a supervisor and manager, I always would appreciate, well, not appreciate, but I would have to give clients to people, right? That's just something. Clients come in, they walk in the door, you have to give them somebody. So it's being creative about it and looking at, okay, well, maybe we can look at your caseload and let's go through it together and see maybe there are some people that we can move on somewhere else, yep, or to a peer or some other route so that we can take on these new people. So just being collaborative
and creative. Absolutely.
And creative and communicative. Yes.
And that's the thing too, is that when we feel threatened and scared, we're not creative. Like it's a totally different part of the brain. And so it really inhibits our ability to think, strategically and creatively about stuff. Yeah, it's tough for sure. But I really agree, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, one more. Okay, Leah.
Yeah, one more. Last one.
Yeah. Any advice for helping yourself not think about work while not at work? This happened to me 2 weeks ago. I was in my bathroom brushing my teeth, and this woman from one of my job situations popped into my head, and we were having some conflict. And I literally said out loud, "Get out of my bathroom," blank, like her name, because she was in my head while I was brushing my teeth. She doesn't belong in my house with my family time and my personal time. That's not okay. So I was doing my best to reinforce my own internal boundary with my brain space being taken up by this person. That works for me. So I'm just sharing that as an idea, but it's about when you find your brain getting twisted into work, when you're wanting to be focused on at home, pay attention to that, recognize it, do your best to try and dismiss it, and then focus on back what's happening right around you, right? Really refocus your attention on something right in the present And then if it wanders away again, refocus yourself back. And it becomes a practice that you do. And it'll get easier over time to establish that sort of mental boundary in your headspace. But yeah, I like to tell myself, knock it off. Get out of my head. Yeah.
Saying it out loud is great.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. It works for me. It just does. But yeah. Thanks all for
Thank
coming
you.
today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And we have the link up there for our evaluation. Please do fill it out. We really do appreciate it. We really take what you say into consideration. We read them all. So please do fill it out. We would appreciate it. And check out our website. Dr. Mauseth is going to be back.
Yeah. I'm working with
check out
one
our
of my
website.
colleagues, Salsa
Yes.
Elzaveti. She and I are going to be presenting on cultural considerations when you're working in crisis response. So yeah. Thanks, folks. Appreciate you.